All right. Make sure I am. Can you hear me,
Oh,
Aaron?
those fade out skills, Cardozi. Are you
That's good. That's
impressed?
good. Yeah, that was good. Hey, do we hire a DJ for this session?
One of
Shout
many
out to
talents.
Lakeisha. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. So happy to be here with you all. Um, yes, Lakendra, we'll have a follow-up email with links and surveys and some playlist music options for your vibes in the future. So glad to be here. I appreciate all of you naming who you are and where you're calling from. As much as Zoom has like attempted to flatten our work, this is the one really upside, right? Like we get to have people calling in from all kind of places, which I know I really appreciate. All right, so welcome. Our webinar today is called A Collective Legacy, Designing a DEI Plan and Impact that Inspires. And we'll talk a little bit about that idea of legacy and that idea of inspiration in a little bit. My name is Cardozi Jones. I am the CEO and founder of True North EDI.
Hey everyone, my name is Erin Dunleavy. I am vice president and a facilitator on the team at True North EDI, and I follow Cardozi wherever he goes. So,
VP part-time soulmate.
right, part-time soulmate.
Thanks, Erin. For those of you that don't know, True North EDI is a consulting firm. I founded it in 2019, I believe, after years of private consulting, with kind of Erin by my side as a thought partner. And our hope is that we support organizations through reflection, through learning, through action to create more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive, more just professional communities. And we've had the privilege of doing that work from before pandemic, through pandemic, and beyond.
So, well, first of all, just thanks everybody in the chat. We have like an international crowd today, which is exciting. Folks that we know, folks that are new. So welcome everyone, and thanks for introducing yourselves in the chat. So our goals for our time together are pretty simple, but 75 minutes is fast. So we're going to try and orient ourselves in the landscape of DEI. We know it's changing. It's been changing for the last couple of years. So we're going to try and place ourselves in that landscape. We're also going to apply a framework so that you can locate yourself in your current DEI journey, or think about how your organization, or maybe even your independent consulting work might begin to think about DEI differently. We're also going to explore True North EDI's theory of change, and we're going to do that through client case studies. We're going to share some of our own client experiences, and we'll highlight the possibility for organizations that commit to a practice and a cycle of learning and action. We really are going to emphasize the word cycle today. This is an iterative process for us, but we're excited to talk it through.
Yes, and if you don't know, I'm assuming everyone who's on the Zoom link here knows what DEI means, but just to ground us, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is one of many names that our work falls under, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, race, equity. There's so many kind of pieces of language to grapple with. We use DEI broadly, just to kind of have a piece of language to go back to. So some things to know. They're maybe obvious, but we want to share up front. Webinars have boundaries, right? This is a very specific space. So this will be a high level, but hopefully meaningful overview of how to design and locate your organization within a DEI process. There's a lot we could go into. Obviously, we don't have time to, but we're going to try to narrow in on the most important pieces of our approach to this work, and speak to that through examples as well. There are many approaches and frameworks. I mean, there are frameworks on top of frameworks on top of frameworks when it comes to DEI and equity work. Ours is designed to feel accessible. So whether that's how kind of it feels today, or just even stepping back and thinking about, what it would look like to partner with us, or to kind of be in community with us, we hope to create really humanistic, holistic, and accessible processes to move ourselves toward more equitable outcomes. And to that end, we'll say this again in the end, but feel free to reach out to us for more.
Absolutely. So our agenda today, again, it's pretty concise, but we are going to start with our introductions, which we have already nailed. Check on that. We're going to do a little opening with everybody just to get to know one another through the chat. And we're going to do an overview of our framework. And again, we'll look at case studies and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So hopefully we manage to get through all of this in the 75 minutes we have.
Yes. My mouse is very big, so please excuse that. Also, I'm a little coffee today, so I'm gonna try. I have tea and I have water and I have lozenges to to mitigate that a little bit. But bear with us. We're gonna use two major functions today in terms of Zoom. First is the chat function, and then toward the end we'll be using the Q&A function. So the chat function, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen, we're going to use now for a little kind of our first point of engagement for the day, which is an opening. So we're going to ask you two questions, and we're going to ask you to put your answer to whatever you come up with succinctly in the chat for the group to see. The first question: in your life or profession, what have you found is one necessary condition for individual growth? In your life or profession, what have you found is one necessary condition for individual growth? So whether you're thinking about that as yourself, or maybe you were a supervisor or a director and you saw someone else grow, what has one necessary condition been? Feel free to throw that in the chat. And what are we seeing?
Amazing things already. We're seeing a need to be trusted, space to ask questions, to be vulnerable, to be challenged, time for reflection, imagination, safety, learning from mistakes. That's a big one. Challenges and opportunities, open-mindedness, self-awareness, psychological safety. I love this. Amy says an ability to admit when you're wrong. Maybe a top 3 skill, certainly of my adulthood. And then Alexa offered to admit that I'm wrong, right? Ownership, courage. These are really like accountability thoughts here. Space for authenticity, to know you belong, clear expectations. We're looking at opportunities for reflection, humility, and confidence.
Nice. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, everyone. These are awesome. So our second question is similar, and I'm curious if it will elicit a different response completely, or if you find that it's the same. And the question is, in your life and profession, what have you found is one necessary condition for collective growth? A necessary condition for collective growth. Throw it in the chat.
Already trust, safety, accountability, communication, shared values, common purpose, a collective goal, again with shared values. Group norms, exclamation point. Thanks, Anne. Trust and feeling safe, perseverance, respect, and vision. Forgiveness and action. I love that. Really important parts of accountability.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. So much of our work is tending to this intersection of individual to collective, right? We can't actually move forward without our ability to inspire or motivate individuals, but that isn't enough, right? We need to find a way to galvanize collectives, to move collectives toward a common place. Now, this doesn't mean everyone agrees, right? That is not our work, and that's not the nature of community, but we can move forward with, as folks have shared, a common goal, can move forward with accountability, can move forward with normalizing how we want to be and how we want to show up in groups and community in our processes. So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate this. So we'll come back kind of to our engagement piece at the end of our session today for some Q&A. So we'll use the Q&A function when that happens. So one thing we want to do, we always do kind of before we dive into like content of our sessions, is to calibrate a little bit on language. So, we talk about, what do we mean by diversity and inclusion? We're going to kind of skip that today and assume a base level of awareness and understanding of those pieces of language. But we do want to calibrate around the words legacy and inspire, as they are the name of our session today. So we'll look up Oxford Dictionary's definition of legacy is the long, let me move my chats here. Okay. The long-lasting impact of particular events, actions, etc., that took place in the past or of a person's life. So we want to consider the way that legacy shows up in terms of what we leave behind, but we cannot do that without giving extreme attention to and care to what we are doing today to create that footprint, to create that impact. Secondly, inspire. So we're going to look at two definitions here. So the first is to fill someone with the urge or ability to do or feel something, especially to do something creative. We'll return to this in a bit, but so much of DEI work, so much of justice work is sci-fi. It is the creativity necessary to imagine a world that you've never seen before. The second definition here, I don't use this word a lot in this way. So it struck me as both meaningful, but also really useful to breathe in air, to inhale. So beyond just kind of have me want to do something or feel something, what does it mean to breathe life into something, right? How do these processes, how do we create them in such a way where they are life-giving and life-affirming? One thing that's true for Aaron and I, and for kind of the way we move through True North, it is from, through, and toward the place of joy. And for us, that means wholeness, it means life, it means complexity. And that's, hopefully we can kind of continue to invoke that as we move forward in our session today.
Absolutely. We love and are not afraid of big, beautiful, idealistic language at True North EDI. We've had moments of reflection on it, and then we just decided to sort of unapologetically move forward with really aspirational and inspirational ways of talking about the things we want to do in our DEI work. So with that in mind, we also have to be honest about where we are and what's happening. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges of the DEI landscape. There are so many critiques. There are plenty of critiques. It wouldn't take you long on Google to probably a critique would populate your Google bar if you put in DEI. So we want to be honest about where the challenges are and how we think about them at True North EDI. So the first challenge, and certainly critique of the DEI industry, is that there's a lack of direction or sort of big picture. Because DEI has no agreed upon, there's no overarching kind of body of DEI principles with no clear answer to the question, although many will say that they have it, are we doing it right? There are so many scholars in the field, some of them doing their work really, really well, that will use kind of a binary model. This is the right way to do it and the wrong way to do it. The work can feel directionless. That is an important piece of kind of information and criticism sort of for the work as it's been done in the past. We also know that we're challenged by a false idea that DEI work is linear. Certainly not just DEI work. I mean, there's a lot of things we could say are falsely linear, right? DEI is presented as a sort of spectrum, right? There's a destination, you get there. If you get there, you've done it right. So we've inserting this binary and then this destination, good job, everybody pats themselves on the back, and it discounts the impact of a dynamic landscape, one that's always changing, always moving, and the necessity for integration of DEI analysis and activity into systems. And we know systems change all the time. So if systems are changing all the time, if DEI is really integrated, it will change too, and it will be iterative. I would say this is the biggest critique that we've heard that feels very, very true, very real, which is that the DEI work stops at trainings and conversations. We don't even really offer trainings at True North EDI. That's not a word we use. We typically use the word facilitation and the facilitation of sessions or modules. I know it's semantics, but we want to be precise with our language. Employees are often mandated to participate in workshops and conversations that don't translate to meaningful actions. And what that does immediately is erode trust. It erodes trust in the organization, in organizational leadership, and then it erodes trust in DEI as a whole. We've been blogging about this at True North. We really want to push back against the idea that folks are sort of not anticipating that DEI work will lead to change. That's essential. Finally, we think of processes that really lack balance. Our framework that we use at True North EDI is about organizational health, and DEI initiatives focused only on outcomes and return on investments, that's what ROI means here, can feel soulless and bulldoze the necessary work of healing and trust building. So you'll notice that our third challenge, which is kind of stopping at conversation, and our fourth challenge, no conversation and only focus on outcome. They're sort of the inverse challenges, but neither one, we've experienced both, and neither one actually works. The fact of the matter is that this is work that requires some self-reflection. We saw some of that in the chat at the beginning of our conversation today. So these are some of the landscape challenges. It's also worth mentioning that the political and national landscape is not currently, right, supportive of this work in a lot of ways, right? If you work for a federally funded organization, you're likely losing funding. If you are an educator, we know the threats to the work of equity and anti-racism in education are very real. So we're encountering more fear in the landscape as well. And that is something that we have values to buffer ourselves against.
Thanks, Aaron. I realize bulldoze is not a word I see in writing very often, but it strikes me as lovingly, because my fifth grade science teacher used to call me the great bulldozer, Cardozi the bulldozer. So I appreciate it. Moving forward, we want to also think to so what's possible. If I can get my mouse working, great. So the possibilities that exist with DEI work, and there are many. But we really want to think about the approach and kind of our theory of change that we're sharing with you all today and what's possible in that approach. So first, this idea of a locator beacon, right? We are here. It's Mall Maps 101. So a bird's eye view of where an organization is and where it is moving toward in their DEI work. So much of what I think Jade's participants is kind of not knowing up from down, back from front, where are we, why are we? And so having kind of, again, like a bird's eye view landscape of where we are can be really orienting, and that leads to learning and trust. Speaking of learning, principles for learning, all processes don't lead to understanding, and all understanding doesn't lead to action. So Aaron and I, a big part of our background is education. And that means that our experience, so much of our intellectual and practical research involves how do people learn? So here, approaches rooted in praxis that understand this kind of spiraling human relationship between learning and action. Also practices theory, learn, action, repeat, theory, learn, action, repeat. So much of our work comes from the pedagogy and research of Paulo Freire. Folks that engage in this process, the change is better equipped to thrive. It's better equipped to be secure because it is a process that internalizes change, internalizes motivation. Practice, not destination. So again, rather than a linear DEI process through which organizations gain points when reaching the next level, realistic approaches are cyclical in nature. We are constantly returning to the learning, to the action, to the reflection, right? It is a wheel that turns, but it is a wheel that moves forward. And I think so much of the work that we've seen happen or we've had to kind of come in and adjust to is when the wheel is turning, but not moving forward. Finally, again, thinking about what Aaron shared last time, this idea of prioritizing balance. Inequity is characterized by a lack of balance. That lack of balance creates disparities in the way individuals experience and navigate their professions and communities in quantitative and qualitative ways. So approaches that create more balance move through the work with equity at the center in order to create equitable outcomes. When we talk about the definition of equity, and we go into that with our clients and in sessions and workshops, one of the questions we ask folks, and folks ask us, is equity a process or is equity a product, a destination? And the answer is it's both. The equity that is created through an oppressive process is actually not equity. right? So how do we find that balance? How do we incorporate that balance into our work so that we have those equitable outcomes?
Absolutely. So let's look at our theory of change. Our theory of change, as Cardozi said, really is rooted in praxis, this idea of how humans learn and then return to learning, right, when changes happen. So we really do start with learning. For us at True North, what this means is that we're actually making the invisible visible, right? We are attending to what it is that we don't know or we can't see, or that is visible to some based on their experiences and the experiences of their identity, and not visible to others. So we spend time discovering and learning in this first phase. Then we move into reflection. Again, as we've said, we have the data to show us that if we move right into action after saying this is what we don't have, and we don't have time to reflect, we have a colleague who says that policies can be changed by the hurt feelings, essentially, of leaders, right? If we're not taking time to really think about what it means, what's ours and what's not ours, does what we inherited match the vision that we have of our future? We miss out an opportunity to have true buy-in. Then we move into a reimagine phase. What this does is it allows us to imagine the possibilities. This is the sci-fi quality of our theory of change, right? What's the future we want to see that we haven't seen yet? And then how are we going to build it? And ACT is just that. This is how we hold ourselves accountable to the change we want to see.
Thank you, Erin. So we want to share with you and expound upon those kind of 4 phases of the work. And just so for folks who aren't familiar with language theory of change, this is how we believe change happens. Right, it's really as simple as that. And it can go from very, very, very high level to very, very, very granular. We're going to try to find some place in the middle, just for the sake of our time together, to share with you some components of that theory, and what it both looks like, and conceptually in language, but also what it looked like for us in relationship to some of our client work. So first, the learn phase of our theory here. What is present and what needs to change? It's really as simple as that. And what we're asking, what we're saying here is participating in EDI processes, equity processes, require that we be open and curious about the values we've inherited, that we calibrate around necessary language and concepts, and that we make visible the often invisible histories that impact our systems, society, and day-to-day lives. We talk a lot at True North about inheritances. What have we been passed down? What have we received from those who came before us that have been kind of imagined before us, and making that visible, making what's visible to some already visible to the whole. That must happen to move forward.
We also have a line of inquiry that we use to kind of engage the learning phase. And the learning phase allows us to identify what's present and what needs to change, as Cardozi was saying. So the first question that we would ask you now to reflect on and think about, so these questions are really here for you to start processing too in your own experience or journey, is where do the policies and practices of the organization align with its mission and values? This is an essential question of any equity work. When are those policies and practices not in alignment? Where are the gaps? What gaps exist? I currently work for organizations, right, where I know that there is a misalignment between who we say we are in the world and actually how we do things internally. And that's very disjointing for employees, for members of the community, for people who want to do the good work.
The next question we ask: what bodies and identities are present and not present, centered and decentered? And what histories must be made visible to honestly address disparities that exist in our professional community? So, as we know, identity is complex, and history is complex, and it is layered. So we do want to understand how that layeredness is operating within our spaces. We have to understand. Without an understanding of how we got here, an example is just something like race. Right? We all know internally what race means, but very few of us were taught a definition for race growing up in school, for example, right? So a lot of our work as adult learners is to both unlearn and relearn or newly learn information that was kept from us because of those inheritances.
Absolutely. No good equity work starts without a picture of the information. Where are the disparities? What information do we have? What information do we need? What information would give us a more whole picture of our organization and illuminate opportunities for growth? Just so you all know, at True North, we advocate for multiple entry points of assessment. Again, this is another kind of teacher brain thing. You could do an equity audit. That's a great way to start. We also advocate for town halls, focus groups, interviews, right? There are so many ways we can gather information about what it's like to actually be at a place so that we can know where we have to start, right? This discovery phase is essential because otherwise you're creating kind of a roadmap to nowhere. We don't know what it is that we need to change.
Thank you. And similarly, the final question here is, what does it feel like to work here? It's a question that I don't believe is asked often enough. And certainly we know just the way that power and positionality works, it will feel differently for different people. So the question that we get to in the reimagining phase is, what do we want it to feel like to work here? Which we'll move toward in a second. So one of my, this past 2 years, we've been working with Penguin Random House, which is one of the largest publishers in the world. And the phase of the work that we have been mostly engaging is the learn and reflect phases of the work. So for the learning phase, they had done kind of organizational assessments. They have their demographic breakdown, they have their positional breakdowns. They've done some limited work on kind of the topical DEI, implicit bias, microaggressions. But it was optional, right? And some work can be optional, some work can be mandatory. This was optional, but it didn't really touch the bulk of the 5,000 staff members who work at PRH. So they worked with us to design a kind of intensive module set. There were video modules, which was interesting to do, to reach all 5,000 of their employees. And there are two things that I want to say are important about that learning, that design, that I think are important for all learning phases. One is that it was designed in such a way that no matter who you were, in terms of racial identity, ethnicity, gender, ability, you could step in from where you are and then move forward. It wasn't assuming a lack of knowledge, right? It was kind of, again, making visible the things that impact us and asking really important questions around how do we transcend those things toward more equitable goals, and toward the company values, making that alignment. What does it look like to align? And the other thing that it did was looked deeply at the intersection of publishing and equity. And that is important, and I think often missed when we do and go through learning processes. So much of DEI over the last decade and plus have been these kind of isolated topics and themes. Again, microaggressions 101, implicit bias 101, important concepts to understand. But when they are explored in a vacuum outside of the thing we all do here every day, the reason that we're here, they're just less impactful. So that's one example of a learning process I think was really useful. And the completion rate alone was pretty outstanding in terms of PRH's history. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
We also learned that we like to be on camera, Cardozi and I. We're waiting for the talk show invite.
Yeah.
It's true. That was our first time doing video module series, so it was a little scary at the beginning, but you try something new and you succeed. So our second phase here is to reflect and how we can best access that change. And Cardozi is going to talk a little bit in a minute or two about how Penguin Random House kind of moved through the reflection phase of our theory of change, but ultimately built into all of our work is the individual and collective practice of listening, sharing, and reflecting. So we prioritize the time it takes to process what we've explored, sort through thoughts and feelings that will impact how we move forward. This was so essential for Penguin Random House. Cardozi, I know you can remember, leaders, I think rightfully, leaders are trying to think about how the language we use in the modules is going to impact a really diverse national, this was the US workforce. So it's over 5,000 employees, as Cardozi said. We hadn't moved to the international community yet of PRH, but of course, leaders are trying to be thoughtful, but it meant that certain language we were using was creating emotional responses, right, for certain leaders in the organization. And that had to be worked through so that we could operate with integrity at True North, right, because we weren't looking to water anything down.
Yes, thanks, Aaron. So thinking about the line of inquiry, right, these essential questions we ask that guide every phase of our process. In the reflect phase, the first question is, where do we position ourselves in the work? What will drive us forward and what will hold us back as individuals, as a collective, right? So these are questions I'm asking of myself as a participant in the process.
We're thinking also about what opportunities exist to meet the needs that have surfaced during the learning phase. What are the necessary conditions, right? We can know we want to grow a certain kind of thing, but if there's no sunlight, there's no water, the soil is bad, right? It's just not going to grow no matter how much we want it, right? So what are the necessary agreements we can agree upon to drive the work forward in a meaningful, equitable, and inclusive way?
Thank you. This question of what requires healing and attending to. So as we engage in any learning process, any learning phase, ultimately what will come up is the ways in which harm may have happened across, like laterally, vertically. The harm is a part of communities, and it certainly is a part of historical oppression. But as we surface that, we do need to figure out what it looks like to tend to care for, to address that harm, and to work toward healing. Skipping over that phase erodes trust and ultimately really mitigates any possible positive impacts the work can have.
Absolutely. That's a big trust eroder, is to not address historical harms within the organization. What is the relationship between our organization's commitment to change and access to resources for change? We like to think about this as like a matrix. We have worked with clients who are both, right? Examples of clients who are very high resource, right? Very well resourced and very low commitment to anything happening. Lily Zhang, in their book, DEI Deconstructed, it's excellent if anybody hasn't read it yet, talks about this very thing, right? Spending a lot of money on a 1-hour talk, right? Tens of thousands of dollars on a keynote, right? For one particular day of professional learning, right? So we've got high resource and low commitment. We also have worked with plenty of organizations that have huge commitment to change and are low resource, right? Or have, a need for more resource in terms of accessing that change. So we need to reflect on what we have, where we can get what we need, and that will bring us back to the necessary conditions question, so that we're prepared and primed for the change to actually happen.
Thank you. So thinking about PRH, Penguin Random House, and their kind of what we'll call the reflect phase of their work. Again, none of these exist in a vacuum, right? We're kind of always returning to these processes in the micro moment, but also in the macro kind of map of the DEI work. But in their reflection phase, two things stand out to me. One was they prioritized space for BIPOC, the employee resource group. I think they call it BIPOC at PRH. So people of color who came together to both talk about what it meant to be part of this DEI process as a person of color, right? What does that mean to begin this work with their company? And some of them have been vocal in the past, some of them have been quieter in the past, but this was a time and where folks were positioned to share. But what does that mean now, right? What does it mean when we create space in an institution for sharing that potentially didn't exist before? So we had some time to grapple with that together. We also took some time reflecting with leaders in the organization, leaders throughout, from managers, directors, VPs, in terms of what it meant to lead teams through the DEI work. So much of the work that we did in the learning process was at the team level. It was for teams to grapple with, in marketing, in editing, in kind of different imprints, looking at their spheres of influence. But as a manager, as a director, you are positioned as someone who is guiding that team. But what does it mean to do that through an equity lens? What are the pitfalls? What are the possibilities? So we create a space to really just talk about that. So folks feel a sense of comfort, or just even an outlet to share some of those insecurities.
Absolutely. Here we're in our third phase, our favorite phase, the sci-fi phase, the reimagine or the imagine phase, based on the work that you've done in your organization so far. This is where we decide what it will look like during and after the change, right? So we're really doing a lot of imagining and a lot of aspirational work here. We know that reflection allows us to imagine possibilities for a more equitable and just future. Not only where change is possible, but we see ourselves as agents of that change. So now, as Cardozi said, we start to kind of step in where we are. Reimagining invites us to identify desired outcomes in specific targeted areas within the organization and allows us to then visualize their impact. So the case study we're going to look at for this reimagine phase is the Milbank Memorial Fund. Now, this was a we worked with the Milbank Memorial Fund for about a year. They have really done some excellent work in terms of their equity journey. And for the reimagining stage, the Milbank Memorial Fund staff worked in departmental teams and moved through a 4-week, what we call an aspirations to actions process. So what they essentially did was they asked themselves, the first question, which we've already named, what have we inherited that no longer serves our vision of equity? And we did that both as a collective and as a team. And if we were to counter that inheritance, what will Milbank look, feel, and sound like? So we did this imagining process in the aspirations to actions framework with Milbank, which was so fascinating because Milbank is over 120 years old. Now, Milbank is a public health fund, and they fund research into public health initiatives, impact law. They have a journal, a quarterly, a medical journal. And you can imagine that with a 120-year history, there was a lot that Milbank needed to face. And so a lot of our reimagining stage was, what would it look like after the changes have happened, but not ignoring or silencing what had happened before. And this was hard work. I'm not going to say that it went easy, because we had a lot of resistance even from the board. It's hard sometimes for folks to look backwards and say, well, I wasn't there, and it wasn't us, who did those things, right? Funding really unethical medical experiments, eugenics, right? Things that we know have impact in public health today. So our job at True North was to hold them accountable in this imagining phase and say, you can't imagine the future without acknowledging that past. My background is restorative justice, and we think of this as essential to any kind of truth and reconciliation. So the line of inquiry here is based on what we've learned and based on what we're willing to face at Milbank. What kind of change agent am I, and where do I see myself in this work? If our equity work is successful, what kind of organization will we be, right? What are we trying to counter or reimagine? And really name those. Be willing to face them and name them. Then what explicit achievable outcomes are we working towards? This is the keystone question I like to think of, right? If we were building kind of a stone bridge, the keystone would be holding it all together, as it were. We're looking now for imagining explicit achievable outcomes, which they were able to do, I think, in a pretty powerful way.
It was, so I wasn't on that contract with Aaron, but it was really powerful to watch from the outside. You and one of our consultants, Purvi Shah, did that work with them. So the final phase, again, of the cycle, not of the work, but of the cycle, is the act phase, right? The steps necessary to achieve change. So true equity relies on our ability to manifest our goals into actualized practices, policies, and cultural shifts. It's important to remember here, and this came up in, I think, our opening chat about kind of perfectionism. Actions will never be perfect. They will never be exhaustive, but those built on a foundation of learning and collective, and I'd say inclusive engagement, are best positioned to take root and thrive. So we're going to share with you in a moment kind of a zoomed out version of what the entire cycle looks like. But to render this act phase into some essential questions here, we're asking, how will we, that is leaders, members of the community, individuals hold ourselves accountable to the plan, right? We have to incorporate accountability into the act phase. Otherwise, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, right? We will not see it through, because every other priority, especially when it comes to DEI, every other priority that we inherited around capitalism, around produce, and urgency will take over and bring the DEI down. So how do we hold ourselves accountable to the work we plan to do? A big thing for us, so important to us, is how will we celebrate successes? How will we push through challenges? This is just part of being human, folks, right? Knowing that to move forward, I have to know when I've won. I have to know when I feel like I've been moving in the right direction and when I'm moving closer to my true north, as it were. But also there is a skill in pushing through challenges. Of course, that means on the individual kind of level, but also on the collective level. What does it mean to have a practice of pushing through challenges as a collective? Aaron, I'll give you these two.
Thanks. Yeah, I think with celebrating, people are really hesitant to celebrate like achieving equity goals because we're just not there, right? It's never, there's always something else to be done and we can always do it better. However, to Cardozzi's point, we want to make sure that we're acknowledging and being transparent about the fact that we said we were going to do this thing and we did it. So we also want to think about how labor is equitably distributed in relation to the tasks and responsibilities required for the change to be enacted. This is so important. Every organization doing any kind of DEI work needs to ask itself really honestly, are the people who are most marginalized within our organization holding the bulk of the labor of the change?
Yes, we've heard some horror stories about that, honestly. Folks who have been like, oh, we're going through a DEI process, like change is going to happen. Oh wait, I Black woman have to do it, right? I'm the one who's being tasked to do it. I'm the one who's the go-to for the questions, the go-to to join the team, to join the task force, but with what compensation, right? With what time or resources allocated. So this is a big question that often falls through the cracks as we participate in DEI work.
Absolutely. Be very wary too. We're very wary of leadership that says, well, we want people to be honest, so we're not going to participate. We're not going to participate in the learning phase. We're not going to participate in the reflection. Because we want to give people the space to be honest. And we don't, well, first of all, what that belies is that, there's a lack of trust, right? So, and it's also our friend Kathleen Antoine Abiala calls it an off-ramp, right? It's a clever way for me to get out of doing any labor by saying that I'm providing freedom that people haven't necessarily asked for. And people need to know that leaders are taking on the responsibility, right, of change. So finally, really, what systemic conditions are necessary for the change to be secured? This is also where leadership is going to be key, because we know that folks who understand how the organization works can understand what the conditions are necessary in order for it to be changed or transformed, because it does happen all the time for, other business kind of bottom line ROI cases. In terms of this act phase, again, Milbank was a really, really kind of exciting case study for us. I'm including in the chat a link to their racial equity statement of purpose, which outlines almost really all of these phases. It outlines what they learned. It outlined what they were willing to reflect on and face. It outlined the future they were trying to see. And a couple of actions that happened is that the aspirations to actions in the kind of imagine phase became an integrated part of Milbank's overarching 5-year strategic plan. Integrated. So it went from being siloed to fully integrating. Once the aspirations to actions were integrated, right? The DEI goals were integrated into the strategic plan. It was clear that the mission had to be transformed a little bit. And now equity is more at the center of what Milbank does, because they can't be who they say they want to be without it. Actions were also made transparent, visible to the public, and iterative. So what we helped them create, which if you're clicking on that link that's in the chat right now, was 2 years ago. You'll notice that the year now is 2023. They have achieved a lot of their goals and now they have new ones. So they went back to that model and they updated for this new year. So it's iterative. But there was a lot of action that took place, and you can read about a lot of the actions that they did on their website.
Thanks, Aaron. So we want to take a moment to kind of zoom out the entire phase. Ooh.
Are people seeing it now? I popped it in the chat.
We'll send it with the materials after.
Okay, sounds good. Looks like I can't chat with everybody. I'm sorry, everyone.
Not my fault. I didn't do it, I promise. We will share that with materials and a few materials on the other side of all this. We want to, before we move into questions and answers, or questions and offering, questions and insights, we want to zoom out a little bit to share with you kind of what the entire process can look like. So one of our clients is actually similar to Millbank Memorial Fund, is the Commonwealth Fund. They are a foundation that prioritizes and funds toward health equity and health access to kind of quality healthcare in America. And they have an international wing as well. But the Commonwealth Fund really focused on beginning a DEI journey in 2018, I believe. So we're looking at 2018 to 2023. And I want to pull out some aspects of that work. We worked with them for the past, I want to say, 3 years. So my entry point into them was right before COVID. I had my first talk with a few members of the fund, and then COVID happened, and we had the murder of George Floyd, which changed everything. But what that created for me, and for many consultants, I think, was this really intimate relationship with their clients, because we were kind of participating in this rocking global events. So looking at the Commonwealth Fund, their Learn process was really began in 2018. They had workshops that built a foundation and shared awareness, a foundation of shared awareness and understanding, right? Again, what does that mean to make visible to the whole what's already visible to some? They went through an audit of their internal and external practices. How do we do what we do? What structures, what systems are in place? They participated in an organizational assessment. How does it feel to work here? And for whom does it feel what ways? They also participated in their own internal learning sessions. They bring articles, they'd have book clubs. They were all kind of optional opportunities for people to learn more about specific topics. And then they collected and disaggregated demographic data by position. Who works here and where do they work? You can have an extremely diverse organization that is not equitable, right? So they wanted to understand where people were positioned and what those identities and bodies were. Now, if you've done DEI before, you might recognize this phase as a place where your organization stopped. This was all they did, or they did one of these things, or they did two of these things, right? But learning has to move to be secure, to be anchored. Learning has to be moved into this reflection process. So again, pulling out pieces of what they did, they took what they learned and they moved into racial affinity groups, which True North facilitated for them, to really grapple with, as we're looking at who we are and how we work, what does it mean for us individually within the realm, kind of the imperfect realm of race and ethnicity, but to talk about that in safer spaces. They also this is where they created their DEI committee, right? So they created this because, and this DEI committees can be, I don't want to say controversial, but they certainly can be polarizing. But the benefit of a DEI committee, and this was certainly the benefit for them, was that it was a group of people whose sole focus was DEI and a DEI commitment, right? So while it's happening in other parts of the organization, the benefit of a DEI committee is their sole purpose. They get to be single-minded, which really is a thing you don't often get to do in an organization. Part of what surfaced in the learning processes were the but the truth that there is conflict. There is generational conflict. There were conflict that kind of manifested as racial tensions. And time needed to be spent to unpack what it means to address conflict, to address harm, then transform that and transcend that toward the overall DEI equity goals. And finally, part of the reflection process that was built in and operationalized was ongoing executive coaching. I had a really strong relationship with the president at the time, and met with him monthly to really process, again, what does it mean to be a leader, in this case, to be kind of the leader through an equity process, through his own identity, right, as a white Jewish man. So again, pulling out some of what that looked like. moving toward this imagine phase of the work, two things I want to point out here. They drafted a new DEI vision statement. So this is similar to the kind of the work of Milbank Memorial Fund. Pardon me. Some people might put a new vision statement into the ACT section of the ACT phase. For us, it feels important. Writing things down is different from doing the thing that you've written down, right? So DEI vision statement is part of the imagining of any vision statement. Is what do we want our impact to be? How do we want the world, communities, our sector to change on the other side of our work? That is an imagination process. So it had to happen in this phase here, but it was, as all of this was, extremely inclusive, extremely iterative, and was never, and this is important to say, none of this work was ever top down. It was almost all bottom up in terms of position and who was doing the work. Finally, as part of this imagining phase, we participated in the inclusive design of a DEI strategic plan. So we at True North, as Aaron said, we call that an aspirations to actions process. So we see even in that language, we're invoking this theory of change. Action only happens after kind of we create aspirations rooted in our imagination, rooted in our learning. This was a multi-month process. It happened at the departmental level, again, the people thinking about their sphere of influence, and we rendered what came up from department to department into larger organizational commitments, as opposed to many processes that go larger and then down to smaller. We went with the bulk of the people designing, and we rendered upwards. Finally, three things I want to pull out in their ACT phase. So again, accountability is so important. They've operationalized a community accountability plan. So 3 times a year, about every 3 to 4 months, they come together as a whole organization, and teams, departments partner together to share where they are in terms of progress for the actions they laid out in their DEI plan. They get feedback, they share challenges, they share progress, they celebrate successes, and the org kind of does that together a few times a year. It's actually really beautiful. And what it does is it motivates people through community and not through fear, right? We're not the DEI police. We're not getting demerits for not achieving our goals. We're reflecting on what challenges existed. We're reflecting on what would make us stronger in the future. And they do this as a community. One of many things they did as an organization was implemented new grant processes. Their job is to give money, right? They are to give money. They are to promote access and health and quality healthcare. But processes for foundations can be extremely limiting. They can be extremely biased. So they kind of redrafted and redesigned and reimagined what those processes look like to fund work, particularly offered and created by folks of color, and to streamline it. Then finally, they hired a new CEO, actually a president, and he became one of the first Latino leaders of a national healthcare foundation. So a lot of organizations go through this work, and there's a position that opens up, and they refill it with a person who identifies as white or male, and that's fine, right? But we're looking for balance. We're looking for, do your values align with your actions? So that was a lot. Hopefully you got a chance to kind of jot down some questions you might have. We're going to move into a Q&A, and we're going to use the Q&A function, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. Excuse me. I also want to say that at the end of our session today, you'll have I'm going to come out of my screen here. A survey will pop up for feedback for us. So either you can do it right at the end of the session or the webinar, or you'll be emailed a link to the survey as well, along with our materials, and some music and some links to other things. So at this point, we'd love to open up. We have about 15 minutes to answer any questions that might have come up for folks as we were sharing, going through kind of our theory of change, our experiences, related specifically to or loosely connected to what we talked about today. So this is an opportunity for questions, and we'd love to see them.
We've got one here, Cardozi. This is from Jamila. Thanks for this, Jamila. What's after ACT? Do you recommend continued monitoring? This is a great question.
Yeah. So for us, and this is what, this is like what we shared as the rendered down version of our larger plan. Ultimately, measurement, like monitoring and assessment is part of the whole thing. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. So for us today, part of our ACT phase is, or even part of our reimagining phase, is designing what that monitoring will look like, designing what accountability will look like. And so in the ACT phase, that's part of our actions. And again, there really is, it's after ACT is a funny way to look at it, because ACT never really ends, and nothing ever really ends, right? So it depends on what you're shining light on in the moment. So if we're looking to redesign let's say a hiring process, so our hiring process is the thing we're looking at. So we learn what's present in our hiring, what's present in our biases, what have we inherited. We reflect on the hiring process, on how I got here, how you got here, what questions will I ask, what questions do we use. We reimagine what a hiring process looks like, and then we begin to put out into the world and say, here's our new job description with salary range, language that aligns with our values. And ultimately, yeah, you got to see, what do we look like now? After we've done our next round of hiring, where are we? Are we the same? Are we different? So that there does need to be monitoring after the ACT phase, as a real part of it.
When we communicate with you all after the webinar and send you some resources, and you'll get the link to look at Milbank's work on their website, which I wasn't able to share with you in the chat, you'll notice that Milbank has a link to what's called 2022 Racial Equity Statement of Purpose, Commitment and Initiatives Assessment. What they made public was an assessment of how they did with their 2022 goals. And they made that available to anybody who wants to research them online. So what they learned was they still had learning to do related to their historical legacy. Again, 120 some odd years old. And so that is the first bullet in the 2023 commitments, is to continue an ongoing, it's a deep investigation. They're partnered with scholars. I think they're partnered with scholars at Yale, historians. They are really digging deep to uncover essentially what aspects of Milbank's history are impacting their vision and mission today. So you can see that the ACT phase, which was to investigate that legacy, led to just more learning, which is why it's perceived as, we kind of demonstrate it as cyclical.
Thank you. We have a question here. If you have a leader on the executive team that is a roadblock beyond removal, which may not be possible, especially not in the short term, what strategies are there for dealing with that? Aaron, how do you deal with that?
That's so good. That's such a good question, Ovelia. Thank you for asking that. I'm sure there's, 35 people on this call. I'm sure 34 of them are nodding in agreement right now, because they've all had a similar experience. So one thing you'll notice, that Cardozi and we often advocate for, we do advocate for coaching. Now, I say that with a caveat, like an asterisk, because we don't want the people who are the obstacles to the work to get all the resources, right? That's moves away from the values, the central values of equity. However, we spend a lot of time talking to people about their sphere of influence. Where do you step in? Where is your essentially your possibility for impact and for change? And how can we make change in a more emergent, to borrow from Adrienne Marie Brown, in a more emergent way, where in your teams, where in your committees, right, we are able to enact goals and kind of see them through, where we're working around and through some folks who might be obstacles to the work. Fundamentally, a big challenge is that we don't want to center those people. We don't want to move at the pace of the people who are most resistant. It doesn't get us there. Cardozi, anything you want to add to that?
I think it becomes so much of our work is relational, and trying to understand it isn't the person that's the roadblock. There is a roadblock in the person, right? Something's happening that's manifesting for them as maybe volatile, or maybe the constant devil's advocate or the person who's questioning why are we even doing this, something's happening within them that sometimes needs to be targeted, for lack of better military word. But part of our job is to like try to render or surface like what values are at play. No one is not entering the space with values. Everyone has values. And most people believe their values are virtuous values, right? And we know all values are not. But if I can get to the bottom of what are you, Mr. Roadblock person, what values are you bringing here? Sometimes just asking like 3 questions tops can disarm, again, for lack of militaristic language, can disarm folks and have them realize that they actually, what's happening has nothing to do with out here, but really it's in there. It's what's going on within them. That's just one strategy I can think of.
To finish off on that, I've done, we had worked with a client for whom the president, who was a white man, was in many ways sort of signaling that he was very supportive of the work. I would use the word in a performative way, and then during sessions, during feedback sessions, during essentially the theory of change process, was often microaggressing folks, especially women of color in the space, was taking up a lot of space, just essentially showing up in a way that was proving to be an obstacle to the work. And I did take some time with him. I requested a meeting and we just had to have that conversation. We're handling it in the moment as well and trying to make that visible. But it was kind of an impromptu coaching session that allowed really what was invisible to him to be made visible, so that he could get out of his own way, because his intentions were there, and yet his ways of being, he had been socialized to think of leadership as looking a particular way, which was kind of domineering and kind of taking up a lot of space. So it had to be addressed. So that's just kind of another offering around this kind of dilemma, which is very real.
And I think that speaks to Anne's question, right? So that comes up when we enter organizations and say, we're going to offer you and recommend a bottom-up process, not a top-down process, right? We get that kind of like leadership backlash and leadership rash that breaks out when things are reversed. So Anne asked, can you say more about the bottom-up approach to the aspirations to action plan? Does it ever happen that what teams come up with are not aligned? So this is the answers in the question here. The alignment is created from what teams come up with, right? So, Anne, actually, you and I have gone through processes like this before, where we have small groups ideate, generate, brainstorm, think about the work they do, and then we pull out that and compare it and bring it up higher. And now we have these themes that are coming across that are being highlighted here, and those themes ultimately become what the overall plan for the org is, or the overall aspirations and actions are. So the idea here is that no one person is creating what we should be doing. Rather, the people who are closest to the work are part of the process of designing what the work looks like. It's imperfect. All of it's imperfect, right? But we know that, again, if we want equitable outcomes, what does it look like to move through equitable processes to get there? So I find rarely that there's any misalignment, because it's being created from these people.
Absolutely. So we have 2 questions and just a few minutes left. Thanks. Marcus is asking about the absence of disability in the evolution of DEI spaces. What's your take on disability in these conversations, or lack of disability, particularly disabilities that are seen? This is a great question. Cardozi?
Yeah, I think this has actually been more top of mind for me personally, as I've been moving through my own issues with ability and vision impairment, hence my very large mouse on the screen. So I think that we're gonna find things that we have left out, that have fallen through the cracks, and the best way to move forward in that is to acknowledge it, right? Certainly for us, like for example, we didn't toggle closed captions for this session today, right? So I'm like, oh crap, thing that we missed out on, right? That means there's access that is now limited. So like all of our work, it's choosing an area of focus and then generating what's possible when we consider what's present. So much of the work in the past few years has been centered around race, really the past, so much of DEI work in general, or so-called diversity work, which really stemmed from like kind of sexual harassment trainings in the 80s, right? Like so much of the work has been kind of lensed towards specific groups. And so I'm wondering, with your question, what does it look like to, again, as we're presented with information about blind spots and biases, how do we then build around that? Part of our educational background tells us about universal design, right? So how do we create and design work that centers the person who has the most kind of systemic needs, or who's the most systemically marginalized? So that's something that we're in the process of. But what you're naming here is, in my experience, true. It's the truth, right? So how do we keep kind of generating around it?
From a technical perspective, Marcus, I just finished this by saying that any of our discovery phase, our learn phase processes, whether that's an equity audit, focus groups, all include questions about disability and access. And we have noticed that some of the biggest challenges, which we end up having to work into our theory of change, are number one, inaccessible workplaces, right? That should be kind of a standard assessment as a part of any equity audit. How bias and discrimination is impacting people with disabilities, in turn, I mean, anything from like negative attitudes to unequal treatment, and specifically lack of accommodations, to Cardozzi's point. And then finally, like a limited understanding of disabilities. So we do have a client, it came through in their kind of learn phase that there was a real lack of understanding, limited understanding of the experience of people with disabilities within the workspace. And that's both visible and not visible. And so we designed a learning session specifically around that. And we have team members with different areas of expertise, so at True North. So we make sure that identity and kind of representation matters in how we unfold the learning. So those are some technical answers to your question as well. And I'm looking, oh, hey, Luz. I love this question so much. Luz is asking, what type of support do you recommend for people who are part of an EDI group? I'm thinking of the joyful aspect of this work that is so important on so many levels. Luz, I love this question. I'm, of course, thinking about the DEI committee that we had been working on together. Joy is a core value at True North. Joyful, we call it joyful orientation, is one of our core values, right? We want the work to feel like it can be carried, that nothing is heavier than can actually be lifted. And one thing that I'll offer, how we recommend, is that we don't sort of bend to the sometimes critique that comes from some folks, that time spent building community, time spent getting to know one another, time spent laughing with one another in those EDI sessions is wasted time, or time spent celebrating what we've done. And that's a conversation that I'm sure many of you have had. Why are we talking about, like what excites us, or what we're looking forward to on the horizon? Can't we just get to it? We see that as a challenge, right? That's the kind of bulldozing work that Cardozzi was talking about earlier in the session. Fundamentally, this work is about how we relate to one another and the ways that we practice the core habits of relating to one another in more humane, holistic, joyful ways. It's just simply not possible. Also, the future that I'm trying to imagine is a joyful one. So I so appreciate that, Luz, but I know we were in conversation a lot about, do we have to do this kind of opening activity? Do we have to laugh? Do we have to do these kind of games? We love that at True North, but of course, always oriented towards the outcomes. Dozy? You're muted.
No. Oh, here. Final question here. We have a little bit of time to answer from Tara. Do you have advice for how HR can be part of conversations and DEI committees, et cetera, without staff feeling the need to self-censor? I find as HR, sometimes having HR in the room can stifle openness. HR doesn't mean anything. That's my first answer, right? So nothing means anything. So we get to decide what HR means for us. What is the mission statement? What is the value statement? What is the core values of you as HR, of your team? And do people know that? And are those values rooted in a structure that wants to create inclusivity, that wants to create trust, right? There are some operational things that make that challenging sometimes. So I recognize that company to company, org to org, HR can shift and change. My biggest, one of the coolest things we did a few years ago was had each department kind of create their own mission statement and their own value statement, right? That lived underneath the larger orgs. But for HR professionals, it needs to be clear, be clear about what's true. There is a power differential, but then be clear about who you want to be, who the team wants to be, and have conversations about that. What's missing here? What would make this structure be more complete, more whole, and be seen as part of the org? Because it is, right? It's viewed as separate, but it actually is part of it. So it is an interesting and awkward sometimes position to be in. But I think to bring in the larger values of our work into just that team or to just that role can be really powerful here. Share, who do you want to be, and what are your values, and how do you want to be, and then live into it in actions. So that is our time. Cough there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. For those of you that stayed on, thank you, Aaron, for being a wonderful partner as always. So when this session ends, a survey will pop up. We would love for you to take a little bit of time to fill that out. Otherwise, if you don't have the time, we will email you the survey along with the PDF of this session, the webinar, along with some links and some music choices that Aaron chose. And also an opportunity to reach out to us if you feel like you could use the support or the thought partnering of True North EDI, and we'd love to be a partner to you. So thank you again so much. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and more to come. Thanks, everyone.